right, boom. We got the man himself, Jim Crider. What's up, man?
Howdy, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
We talked the other day about you're a financial planner and you recommend Bitcoin to clients. So how'd you get here? How did Jim Crider get here to where he's a financial planner helping people do it that way? What was the path to get there?
Yeah, Bitcoiners typically hate financial planners, and financial planners think that Bitcoiners are insane. Yet I'm here in both worlds, all in. Like I'm all in on both sides. Like I'm the only person I've ever met that actually reread my CFP books after I passed the test, just because that's fun to me. At the same time, like I in my self-identified Bitcoin maxi, like I am very into Bitcoin, and there's this odd dichotomy that most people don't understand how you can be both of those. So how did I get here? I mean, going way back, I got into personal finance. I was out of college. I worked a handful of just odd jobs. I worked in sales, but I'm a really bad salesman. So eventually I left unemployment and so yeah, I was unemployed for a period of time and just really started thinking about like, what do I want to do that I'm actually passionate about, that I'm good at, and that I can make an impact on people's lives. And that led to helping people with money. Like money is the number one cause of divorce in the US. It's one of the top causes of suicide. And if I could help people there, that would be amazing. So I just decided I want to help people have healthy conversations around money and then use their money for what's actually important to them in life. I didn't know what a CFP was or any of this. I didn't know that. That's what I wanted to do. So I left. I got a job working at a very large firm. Eventually got my CFP or certified financial planner. I went to a role. I did retirement planning with primarily physicians, so a lot of high income, high net worth families. Was there for a handful of years, left, went to another firm that I could have more in-depth relationship with clients, was there for only 15 months. In that time, I realized that I'm a really bad employee and I'm very opinionated on how I work with clients and also have a specific type of client I enjoy the most. So I left there and started my own firm. Now I work with specifically with young families who desire early financial independence. And I'm allowed at my own firm, I'm actually allowed to integrate Bitcoin in that. So that's part of what we do.
So someone's like, hey, I want to buy Bitcoin. How do you tell them to buy Bitcoin?
I used to use Swan. I love the education side of things. But now I primarily we're going to look at Strike. It's so easy. And obviously the fees there are fantastic. So go ahead. Like, hey, let's go ahead and buy Bitcoin. Perfect. Download this app. And let's talk. Then once you have it, like, okay, let's talk wallets. And if we're gonna look at Cold Card, or if we're gonna go at multi-sig, or just going to Trezor for a bit, or whatever that looks like, and that's part of how I help people. If my job's to help people use their money efficiently and effectively, then it'd be nuts for me to say you should buy Bitcoin but figure it out on your own. Like, I don't want to have that liability of someone losing Bitcoin and it's on me because I didn't help them actually set it up properly.
Mm-hmm. How many one-on-one conversations have you had in your career?
If I had to ballpark it, I'd say about 30,000 at this point.
That's amazing.
So
That's amazing.
And that's going to range from like, I don't know, someone who's starting their first job at Starbucks and they're just like, hey, I need to set my 401k at Starbucks, to, again, I worked a lot with physicians. So those were always fun. The people, the kids who just came out of residency. So they just went from making 50 grand a year to making 50 grand a paycheck. I love those because you can get them while they're still innocent and before they just go start blowing their money. And then, yeah, lots and lots of my conversations were people in their 60s who were either about to retire or just retired. And which is fantastic because, I've had the conversations with people who are really successful financially, but I've had a lot of conversations with people who were not where they need to be. And I'm able to look back and unwind, like, hey, what were the big actions and the small actions that you could have taken that would allow you to actually be where you hoped you would be at this point in your life. And also on the financial side of things, I've talked to a lot of people who did really, really well on the dollars and cents, yet the things that those dollars and cents were there to support, they completely missed. And every time I think about that, man, my heart aches because your money is nothing more than a resource that's there to help you do what's important to you in life. And so many people do not actually align their money with their life, yet toil for years doing a job and buying things, but actually missing the purpose there. And that's really what I want to help people with.
Something that you helped me understand last week on our Twitter spaces, tangentially, was the accounts themselves are not the problem. Like, the concept of life insurance is not the problem. The concept of a savings account is not a problem. The concept of a Roth IRA is not the problem. It's these assets and currency and investment choices inside each of these things. And that's the way that Bitcoin interacts with the fiat money because of the capital gains tax that creates all of the issues. So that changes everything.
Yeah, it does. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is it removes so much speculation. If we had a money that actually held value, you wouldn't have to speculate on hitting a goal in 3 years. Like for instance, so like where I live, I'm in Texas, right between San Antonio and Austin. And I think in the last year we've bought our house right at 2 years, and it's almost it's probably appreciated by about 85% in 2 years. That's stupid. Like in the last year, it's appreciated by like 42%. If you didn't own a house, then it just became 42% more difficult for you to buy one. Okay. Trust me, I have 3 little kids. My house is not 42% better now. Like it's probably about 40% worse after like just getting beat the junk out of by my kids, you know? That's frustrating. So that's one way Bitcoin can change things. If we have a stable currency that doesn't allow for this crazy amount of inflation, you can't say that that's just because more people are moving to Texas. I know it's part of it, but a lot of it has to do with manipulation of the dollar and assets and institutions going out and scooping up single family houses. Like houses are no longer homes or investments, which is nuts. Um, and that goes back to like the problem with money and how it's a broken system. So if you were to fix the money, then one, like again, houses are homes again. They're not investments. So that's fantastic. But also again, the speculation side of things. If you're going to buy a house in 3 years right now, you have to think, well, if I need $50,000 for a down payment and I can afford to save, or I need $45,000 in 3 years and I can afford to save $45,000. That's it in the next 3 years. So the question is, do you only save the $45,000, but then you're not going to be able to buy the house? So you have to invest it. Well, you could take higher risk to try to keep up in pace with the inflation of the houses, so you can still buy your house. But then there's also the question of what if I'm able to save 45,000, but the way I invest it, it goes down, and when I'm ready to buy a house, it's suddenly only worth 40,000. I only have $40,000, and I'm even further away from buying a house. You have to speculate. Then you have to build a diverse portfolio. That's where typically you'd buy stocks and bonds to make sure that you're having some upside potential, but hedging your volatility because it's short term. And my gosh, there shouldn't be a gym out there that has to be paid to answer that question. That shouldn't be that hard. I want to buy a house in 3 years. Cool. You need 45 grand, save 45 grand. Like, should be that easy, but it's definitely not. Like, those short midterm types of savings goals are actually the hardest because of the unknowns. Like, and everything's even more predictable now. Used to, you could look and say, like, all right, here's a reasonable expectation of what the market and the economy is going to do. Now, all reasons out the window. I'm not just trying to speculate and make rational assumptions on investing. I'm also like trying to play a role of the what card is the Fed going to pull out of their back pocket and like mess everything up again.
Something that I was realizing last week is because that medium point is the hardest to do, and that's where there's the most friction between. Because if we have the conversation of is Bitcoin or USD going to be the base currency 30 years from now, then we're kind of in this like, we're all trying to guess an unknown future. And then if today we're like, hey, what's the better medium of exchange today in, 1 month from now, Bitcoin or United States dollar? You're like, well, Walmart doesn't take Bitcoin yet, so it's obviously like that's super easy to answer. And then that medium term though, if you are meeting with people that are 57, 58, 59 or 61 and like I was realizing if this happens, if this goes down where Bitcoin does replace fiat, boomers and retirees that are currently today 57, 58, 59 are actually going to be among the first users of a Bitcoin centric economy compared to kind of like all of us younger people have the benefit of being able to just stack sats and realize that the market for Bitcoin financial services will just like figure itself out. But these people having to deal with them, if your age right now is forcing you to have to deal with the medium term, that is a very, very difficult time to plan for, which is why this concept of what Bitcoin financial services like are serving these people and helping them navigate the like currency that's like not working and being very frustrated.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Of course, whenever you're building a financial plan and an investment portfolio, you have to consider time horizon and risk tolerance and all that stuff. And yeah, I mean, you have to consider like the reason time horizon is so important is because you have to look at sequence of return risk. And the shorter the time horizon, the more possible. Obviously, there's more short-term volatility if you smooth. And over time, typically, time helps smooth things out. So, sequence of return risk is big deal. So that brings up, all right, if you're going to retire, like my parents, they're in the early 60s, if they're going to retire in the next 5 years, and you think that Bitcoin is going to do what you and I think it's going to do, like it only makes sense to integrate Bitcoin into their portfolio. Yet, how do you do that while also smoothing out sequence of return risk, or a possible uh, just poor sequence there? And yeah, and then that moves in also just is this going to be used primarily as just a means of investing and an inflation hedge and a means of capturing, as I believe, uh, value will exit current uh, value holding places, so bonds, overpriced stocks, overpriced houses, as we see value exiting those to go to a superior store of value, that being Bitcoin. Is Bitcoin for these older people just going to be a means of investing and storing value, or in their lifetime will we see it actually shift to a form of payment and currency? And if so, what are the implications on that? And that's also going to impact, how do you own Bitcoin? Do you own Bitcoin directly in storage so you can actually more easily transact with it? Or are you only buying Bitcoin related companies? Because if that's the case, again, you're just owning equities. So then you have all the thing that's wrapped up in that. And yeah, there's a whole can of worms. That's when my wife and a lot of people are like, how do you study this stuff so much? It's pretty simple. It's like, well, there's a theory behind it. There's the more of the breed love, like pie in the sky, fun stuff to talk about. There's the technicalities. There's just so many things you can go into, because it's changing money. It's changing store value. It's changing, like, has political implications. There's so many things around this, that's just a never ending hole that you can go down. That's why it's fun.
So if you're 57 and you're buying Bitcoin, there is a chance that when that person is 65, so 8 years from now, there is a chance that Bitcoin will have traveled farther down the asset to currency spectrum, and there's a chance that them, using Bitcoin to buy cruises and flying down to El Salvador and buying like brunch on the beach, there's a non-zero chance that that is a reality 8 years from now.
I don't see this being a smooth transition. The early adopters, it's fun to think about. Like all of us who are probably listening to this, like, you're early. So for us, it's like, wow, I'm going to be super rich. But for a lot of people, it's going to be very painful. And you have to consider that. And that's what inspires me to go out and like try to talk to people. Some people are like, oh, you're just trying to get more people in because that'll help you build up this Ponzi scheme. You have to have new people to boost it up. It's like, no, I'm trying to get you in because I'm trying to help you recognize that you're on the Titanic, and I'm desperately trying to pull you on a lifeboat with me. I care about you.
That's why. So when I think about transitionary tools, I think the best Bitcoin financial transitionary tools right now for the stage that we're at are ones that give the optionality to use it as an asset or use it as a currency. Because so when I think about, so if you're 50 right now and you need a house in retirement, like if you're 50 and you buy $7,000 a year of Bitcoin into a Roth IRA for the next, assuming everyone's below the income limits and everything that goes along with the Roth, if you buy $7,000 of Bitcoin from 50 to 60, then you could potentially buy a house direct for Bitcoin coming out of the Roth when you're 62, 63, and that could then be your retirement house.
No, I don't see any holes in that. I have a client that he has a beneficiary or inherited IRA, or Roth IRA rather. So as you're aware, the rules there with the beneficiary Benny IRA is you have 10 years before you have to spend that. You can take it out over time or just wait the 10 years. For us, he has actually a traditional and a Roth. So we're annually spending down the traditional and keeping that within his good tax bracket. But the Roth, you'd be a fool to touch that before the 10 years. So that's exactly their plan. They're in their early 30s. We are allowing that Roth to run. And in 10 years, he's going to exit his current job and have early retirement. And we're going to use that to be able to go and get their retirement house, despite the fact they'll only be in their early 40s. So yeah, you can look at it as, is this going to be used exactly as a means of investment, or is it going to be as a means of currency? The good news is, if it becomes a currency, we would assume the asset appreciation between now and then will be substantial. So that in that sense, it is also an investment between now and then too. So
Yep.
yeah, I love thinking. You touched on a good point, like as far as borrowing against Bitcoin, using that as a means of credit. There's if Bitcoin becomes the currency, then there's implications there again. Like we talked last week about possibly using as life insurance. Like if you're buying let's say you're buying a 25-year, 100 or $100 million 25-year term policy. And if you think in the next 25 years, $1 million is either going to be worth zero or even worth, well, okay, average inflation of about 3% per year. If we say that's average inflation, that means every 24 years, the value of a dollar is cut in half based off just the rule of 72. So that means in 24 years, so it's 25, that $1 million policy will really be worth $500,000 at that time. And then if we compare that to Bitcoin, or if at that point we're on Bitcoin standard, then we would assume that it's not actually just worth $500,000. It's worth maybe $100,000, maybe worthless. So that brings up like, well, that'd be really neat to see a life insurance company come out there that you can buy X dollars worth of, and I'm not talking about like dollar backed Bitcoin, but actually, hey, if you die in the next 25 years, your beneficiaries will receive 2 Bitcoin. That would be awesome to see, because then that's like almost buying a futures contract that's dependent on your death in Bitcoin. Like that would be really neat. Heck, that goes into like payments. I'm noodling. I don't even know if this is allowed, but I'm starting to noodle on the idea of having my fees being paid via Bitcoin. And I don't know. I want to talk to other companies how they do this, but I know it sounds fun. Like, oh, I'm paid in Bitcoin, but really you're paid in dollars that are being converted to Bitcoin immediately. Is there anyone out there who is actually like, I charge 500 sats or whatever, like 200,000 sats per day. And if that's the case, then any client of theirs needs to make sure that they have at least 200. If they're going to use their service in the next little bit, they need to make sure they have 200,000 sats set aside, because if that runs, they need to make sure they can pay it. Otherwise, it's going to cost them more. That is what really being paid in Bitcoin means. It's not dollars, being converted. It's literally, you're going to pay me in Bitcoin. And then how do you adjust that? Like, are you going through annually and adjusting the amount of sats you're going to cost? Or is that on the purchaser side of things to make sure they have enough Bitcoin to keep up with the inflation of your services? Because these are growing at disproportionate rates. Have you come across it? Like, I know there's companies out there. I know like Breedlove, to get his consulting, you can pay him in Bitcoin, but I honestly don't know. Like if he charges, 1 million sats, does he adjust that regularly based off of the sat to dollar move, or is it like, no, it's set?
No, dude, I think, well, number one, there needs to be a ton more content around this. So both of us are making the call right now that no, there needs to be a doubling and a quadrupling of content around this. My thoughts initially off of it are, when I've gone around and I've helped 4 restaurant locations onboard BTC Pay Server. Okay. And what I've done at the small business level is everything is still pricing in dollars, but it's remitted in Bitcoin. And so that's the simple way from a Bitcoin perspective, from a small business or from like a restaurant perspective. And you alluded to that. Like the easiest way is to say, hey, remit the payment in Bitcoin, but then it's pricing still in dollars because we're all still like mentally in dollars. Where I believe the paying in Bitcoin and denominating in Bitcoin comes into play, I think the best way for that currently is on recurring payments, and is on, like, if your salary, if you negotiate with, and kind of the same way clients pay you, like if you're like, hey, I'm going to like work with me for a year and help me like get this whole thing done. And I would pre-buy like all the Bitcoin up front, and then I would just phase it into you over time. And I could see that being the same way for a company too. Like if I'm like saying, hey, this is my salary, like, but instead of giving me a raise in fiat, let's just next year pre-buy this much Bitcoin, keep it on the books, and then remit it to the person over time. That's a way that you're like, Bitcoin almost is the stock option. Bitcoin is the incentive option, and it's getting better over time.
So this gets me fired up. So I obviously, like, corporations and countries adding Bitcoin to their balance sheets brings it brings, typically is going to accompany like, or bring along with it price appreciation, but it'll also bring awareness and trust. But I personally think the means of mass adoption and hyper Bitcoinization will be through things like this. And let's step back, like how this applies to me, and this will phase into where we're at right this moment. So the reason I thought about this was, like, I don't know, I was thinking about if we see a place of hyperinflation and maybe not hyperinflation if you only look at US dollars, but hyperinflation of US dollars compared to Bitcoin. Well, like a lot of my clients pay me a flat fee. Let's say a client pays me $500 a month flat fee. They sign a year, or my contracts are monthly. But anyways, let's say they pay me $500 a month and we revisit that in a year. Well, let's say if during that year time, there's hyperinflation. Well, then I'm taking risk of losing out on purchasing power. So as a business person who believes that there could be hyperinflation between those two currencies, it would make sense for me to say, well, gosh, I want to get paid in Bitcoin. So I have that risk off of my personal balance sheet. So you pay me in Bitcoin. That means my client will either swallow that risk by keeping US dollars and over each month converting USD and buying $500 more of Bitcoin, or whatever. If I say, hey, you're going to pay me whatever amount of sats that is, like, I don't know how many sats that would be, but you're going to pay me 300,000 sats per month. And if 1 month that's going to cost $500, but the next month it's going to cost $700, like they're taking the risk of that becoming more expensive. So then that's going to force the individuals to say, well, like if it's 500 or if it's 200,000 sats for 12 months, I need to go buy 240,000 or 2.4 million, whatever, how many numbers are thrown out there. Yeah, 2.4 million sats. So I can pay Jim and not worry about the movement of sats to dollar parity. And then once I do that, so now I'm being paid actually in Bitcoin. I'm forcing people to buy Bitcoin. And if you see people actually starting to do that, then all of a sudden people are going to buy Bitcoin. And that will bring awareness to like, wow, there actually is this massive price and value disparity between these two. This one's going up in value. This one's going down in value. I'd rather own the one that's going up. People will become awakened and aware of this and want to actually adopt a Bitcoin standard for themselves, not only for having to pay Jim or whatever business, but for their own life, even if that means that they're going down to Kroger, they can convert their appreciated Bitcoin back to USD. They just got their groceries for cheaper because they're on the other side of this hyperinflation. Like this, if I had to draw it out, I think that's how we're going to see hyper Bitcoinization is by small businesses adopting an actual Bitcoin payment system, not USD converted Bitcoin, but actually Bitcoin. I don't know if I'm even allowed to do that, if I'll get in trouble for saying these things, but like, that to me, I see as a big risk for my business, and I would personally want to adopt that.
So what's mechanically stopping the small business from turning that on today? Nothing stopping the small business from turning it. Well, number one, nothing stopping the small business from turning it on, because still delivering it to the business, people can deliver it to the business. But what's stopping the person from delivering it to the business is like capital gains tax. But what if the inflation gets so bad that me moving onto the Bitcoin standard and buying things on a Bitcoin standard, even eating the cap gains tax on the face, what if that still beats inflation?
So yes, I know I got into it on Twitter Spaces a couple weeks ago or last week with some people talking about should you have a US dollar emergency fund? I personally think you should. I have emergency fund. My clients have emergency funds. I think that's smart to do. I think you're nuts if you don't have a USD emergency fund, unless you have a big enough stack of Bitcoin or whatever that even if you have a poor sequence of return that you can sell it and you're okay with selling at a down period, then okay, go for it. But if you're like a normal person, like most plebs who are on Twitter, like we talk big game, but I think most of those plebs, aren't in a position that, if Bitcoin goes down by 50%, which is a reasonable thing to expect, if it goes down by 50%, they're going to be hunky dory if they have to sell. That's not most people. So if that's the case, you should probably have some USD. USD is not an emergency fund. It's not investment. It is insurance against bad events coinciding with bad sequence of returns. That's what it is. Now, again, if you pull that thread further, when would that no longer be necessary? When could I personally go into a Bitcoin standard? Would be when my bills aren't due in USD, because then I don't have to pay it. If instead it is in sats and my bills, like, buying an iPhone, if Apple said to buy an iPhone, you have to pay in Bitcoin. Well, people are going to want to buy it. And then they see like, well, yesterday this iPhone only costs this many sats. Now it costs more. Like, what the heck's going on? They might think that maybe at first they'll think that Apple's manipulating their prices, but then they'll realize that no, that Bitcoin's appreciating. And then they'll go even further and realize the US dollar's depreciating. And then they'll realize, like, oh gosh, I probably should adopt this thing. And then as more people adopt it, suddenly you need to have an emergency fund, not in USD, but in Bitcoin to account for that being an emergency fund. And what happens if this appreciates and I only have cash? Like, risk, you have to consider what risk is. And right now, just because USD and the volatility of Bitcoin, you have to consider risk of Bitcoin depreciating or of drop in price, coinciding with an event that you need dollars. But then later on, the risk that you might want to get off your plate is, again, not being able to keep up on the Bitcoin standard because you're sitting on cash. So when will that script flip? That is interesting.
Do you have any advice on how to find a CPA?
Yeah, ask a lot of questions. Same thing. Anyone you're going to purchase a service from, especially, like, you can't go to Jim Crider CFP and be like, all right, like, let's look under your hood and blah blah blah. And I'm not allowed where I live. I can't have clients give testimonials. So, like, you sort of have to go off my word that I'm going to serve you well, which is horrifying. And it's similar in a CPA world. So what you need to do is just ask a lot of questions, interview more than just one. I've talked to way more CPAs than probably most people would want to try to find good ones. So yeah, I just want to really probe them. Like, are you don't want to ask it like this, but really you want to find out, are they only doing tax prep or are they actually doing tax planning? A lot of CPAs out there actually just do tax prep, which is, frankly, that's really commoditized, and that's what TurboTax does. You want someone who does tax planning. They look at not just what are you going to pay if we look back retroactively, like they are literally just accounting for what has already happened. Versus a tax planner says, hey, if we do these strategic moves, you will pay less dollars in taxes next year or over the next decade. And that's where I have relationships with CPAs. I do a lot. I love talking tax. I can't guarantee what the investments are going to do, but we can look and say, hey, if you max out this account and do these things, like, it's going to save you $8,000 in taxes this year and $40,000 over the next 5 years. That's really fun. And I've partnered with a lot of CPAs to get the nuts and bolts and the actual filing on that. So
if I said, as a prospective client, hey, Jim, I'm a Bitcoiner. 100% of my savings account is already in Bitcoin. 100% of my self-directed Roth IRA is already in Bitcoin. I do hold like a fiat emergency fund, but I want to start getting paid in Bitcoin, and I want to start operating the circular economy as it stands today with that harvesting in both with tracking the gains and tracking the losses while spending Bitcoin, because I have an internal theory that, from my own personal way of living my life, I'm actually going to end up with more Bitcoin doing that and actually be able to create the future that I want to create through doing that. Is there a CPA out there in the world, in software out there in the world, that would help me achieve that? Or is that a Bitcoin financial service that still needs to be created?
There are CPAs that could help. Like, I have a CPA that I love working with. Ironically, they actually have a financial planning arm. They just launched 2 months ago. So I know I'm never going to get a referral from them. I just like the work they do and trust them. So that's where I send my clients. I'm not in it to get referrals. I'm in it to help my clients. So yeah, there's people out there who can do this stuff. I haven't come across anyone who specializes in this. Like, that's where having niches directly for these types of things are going to become really important, because I don't think there's anyone out there who's really in the weeds tracking, helping make sure that you're tracking your cost basis and being strategic around spending and saving and all that stuff only in Bitcoin. I think there's going to be softwares that come out there. I know that it's starting to be, it's becoming more prevalent, just the exchanges themselves, keeping track of your purchase price of when you bought. So that certainly helps. A lot of people up until recently have no clue really what they bought it for. It's speculation. Yeah, that helps. But I think there will be eventually, I don't know, again, that comes to I talk to Bitcoiners all the time on the financial planning side of things. It's always funny. I forget that people don't like to talk about money and they're not open, because I do this all day. I'm an open book. I'll tell you what I make and what I have. Most people, I'm weird. I forget that. So I think that's going to be an odd place for Bitcoiners to open up and say, hey, here's what I have. I'm going to be vulnerable with you so you can help. If you want actual help, you got to be vulnerable. And I think that's going to be a very tough pill to swallow for Bitcoiners. But if you want a CPA to have full transparency so they can actually help you in the fullness, then you got to have them have access to the Bitcoin standard you're living off of.
I actually believe now that forcing all that stuff and automating all that stuff and finding service providers to do all that stuff and really do it that way, combined with how Strike app lets you spend fiat and the business receive Bitcoin, or the way that a Roth IRA where you withdraw in kind allows you to use Bitcoin as currency. All of that combined, I think, is going to push for a de minimis exemption, which is then going to open the floodgates to people buying $7 burritos and buying little things with Bitcoin. And it's just going to continue. There's just going to be the slow roll optimistic outlook for how Bitcoin fixes this very mechanically, I think, is for software to basically automate people still using Bitcoin as currency within the current social contract we have with our government. And that's just going to become more and more widely adopted as the old world crumbles. And there's so much content covering how the old world is crumbling. And there's so much content, talking about the weeds today of how the establishment and bureaucrats are pushing back against the new thing. But that middle ground of how both worlds will coexist in a transitionary manner that still achieves like freedom is so interesting to me. And it's what I want to continue dedicating more brain power to.
Yeah, that's fun. I mean, there's a lot of people, most people out there are probably way smarter than I am. So, but it's still fun to think over and to sit on, because I think it is being neglected and overlooked because a lot of things. And yeah, I agree. I think that the integration of a professional with tech is going to be the means of having this like automated and tracked and done for you on a regular basis, which is going to bring higher adoption and just more normality around this.
I'm super thankful that like you as a professional are like continuing to like just being here at the intersection like of Bitcoin and financial planning and helping break this down for families that don't want to spend their time in the weeds like of the mechanics of financial planning, and you're helping them achieve their goals, and Bitcoin is like helping them do that. So super thankful for the work that you do. Tell us like any closing thoughts.
Yeah, I'm grateful. I love what I get to do. Again, it's about what the money's there for. It's not about the money itself. And I think, in my opinion, Bitcoin is just superior money. Therefore, it'll help you be able to do more of what's important to you. And that's why I like Bitcoin. Like, I don't care about mutual funds and Bitcoin specifically. I care about people and helping them actually do what's important in their life. So that's why I get excited about this stuff. I am sort of in this odd crossroads. I get crucified on a daily basis by financial planners, and then I go on Twitter and I just beat up. Everyone's posting like, I don't need a financial planner. Satoshi Nakamoto's my financial planner. Planners are trash. I'm like, oh, hey. Yeah. But if you want, I'd be happy. You can follow me on Twitter. It's Jim Crider TX, as in Texas. So Jim Crider TX. If you want, you can go to my website. It's Intentional Living FP, as in financial planning. So intentionallivingfp.com. My calendar's on the front page. If you want to put 15 minutes on my calendar and just talk, I love talking this stuff. So if you want to talk, I'd be happy to. Or if you say, gosh, I know a lot about Bitcoin. Most people listening to this probably know way more than I do. So maybe I know a lot about Bitcoin, but I don't know how to integrate that in my general financial picture. You just want to talk through that? I'm more than happy to.
Love it. Hey all, this is Brian. You can reach me on Twitter at Brain Harrington. Shoot me a DM with any feedback from today's episode. This has been a Choice App production. Bitcoin is becoming centric to personal finance, and we want to help you learn how to better engage with Bitcoin financial services. None of this is financial advice and is for education and entertainment only.